Tonight, I feel we're especially privileged. We have the editorial director of Billboard Magazine. I'm sure you're all familiar with the esteemed Billboard publication. Hopefully you all have taken the opportunity over your years here at William Patterson to read it on a regular basis. I think under Bill's stewardship, it's really taken off and has a lot more relevant material in it that, more so than ever before, is necessary for those of you who plan on entering the business world, the entertainment or music side of things. The thing that's going to separate you from anyone else in your pursuit of a career is access to information. That's the commodity. And Billboard is probably the baseline for anything in that area that you want to know about. And I encourage you all, not just because Bill's here, but I would tell you, you're cheating yourself and not doing right by not reading it on a regular basis. And it's not something that you can just, pick up once in a while. You really need to read it on a regular basis. And if you have the wherewithal to subscribe to it, they have a wonderful bunch of internet tools and resources that you can check out daily and really be on top of things and know what's going on in the business. So I'm assuming everybody here in this room has the aspiration and goal, being that your majors here, of moving on, and when you leave these hallowed halls of Ivy, of being in the entertainment business, either vocationally or entrepreneurial or as a performer. Would that be a correct assumption? Okay. So again, as I said, the access to information. So back in the day, you'd leave college, you'd get an entry-level job position, you'd claw your way up the corporate ladder, and you'd have a career. And I'm here to tell you, it doesn't work that way anymore. I'm telling you, you got to put on your entrepreneurial hat and try to figure out something else, because when you leave here and if you go to the HR department at a music company or management company or a publisher or whatever you're trying to do, the jobs aren't there. Your resume goes into a folder, and maybe you'll get a call, maybe not. This gentleman has had a fairly interesting career, and he's found a way of combining two of his favorite things, music, rock and roll, and journalism. So Bill started back in the day, like you, like me, back in college. He went to the University of Delaware, and you were an English major?
I was an English major, that's right. Barely.
Barely?
Yeah.
And then Bill went on, one of his first entry-level positions was a publication that's still kicking around, not as relevant as it used to be, I don't believe, but called CMJ, College Media Journal. Any of you heard of that? Yeah, okay. So he got a job, a writing gig there, and you told me you were commuting out to their offices in Long Island, was it?
Yeah, my first job in New York, I was technically the copy editor for, I think my title was copy chief actually, which was always funny to me because we had no copy department, but I got to manage it. So I was the copy chief of a department of me, and we, it paid me, my first job in New York paid me $15,900 a year, and I was very grateful to have it. I lived in like a closet in Queens so that I could take that job. And honestly, I mean, we were talking about this in the drive on the way over. It was just like one of the best times that I've ever had, because you're young and you finally get your first job and you're in New York City and you're kind of so I mean, I didn't have a lot of money, but you get access because you're in the music business. You have access to the clubs and you have access to the the things that go on in the clubs, and so it was all
free music.
Free music, lots of free music. They were when I first started at CMJ, they would still send out advances on cassette. And then you'd get the closer to finished advances on CD. It was an interesting time.
So you paid your dues there, and then you decided, after being there for about 2 years, move on and try.
Well, there's something that I would point out. I mean, again, I'm just trying to kind of talk to you folks as people who are going to be graduating and looking for careers. It's funny, you said that I combined my loves of rock and roll and writing, but I actually didn't love rock and roll.
I lied.
I loved hip hop. I loved techno. That's what I loved. And so some of this, the reason I was able to get that job at CMJ is because it was '97, early '98, and techno was supposed to be the next big thing. This was when, like, I mean, I don't even know if you guys know these acts anymore, but it's like when Daft Punk and the Chemical Brothers and you know, Aphex Twin, and you know, a handful of these acts were kind of Sneaker Pimps were kind of coming over, and that was going to be the new wave of music. And it never really happened, right? I mean, it happened to a very small degree, and it happened kind of in the underground, and you know, those bands, those sounds changed music forever, but it certainly didn't become like the next grunge, which is what everyone in the business wanted it to become. But because everyone in the business wanted it to become that, and because record labels were taking bets on these things, they were putting money into advertising around this kind of music. And so, you know, the only thing I knew how to do was write and go to these parties. And CMJ wanted someone who could write in complete sentences about the rave scene, basically. And so, because I was sort of in that scene, that's really why I was able to get this first job. That and the fact that, you know, one of the guys that turned out, so, I mean, life is always happenstance, right? It's like equal parts opportunity and then the way you execute on that opportunity. So I worked my way through college, all 6 years of my undergraduate performance. I worked my way through college working in restaurants. I cooked. I couldn't stand people, so I stayed in the kitchen. And at a Bennigan's in Newark, Delaware, this guy, someone's not, you're like, yeah, I'm into Newark, Delaware. At a Bennigan's in Newark, Delaware, there was a waiter there, and we used to get in these like passionate fights about music all the time while we would smoke cigarettes. And he wound up, and then like we kind of lost touch, and then like a year and a half later, I was at a rave in Baltimore and just bumped into this dude randomly, and he was like, had no idea I was into that scene, blah, 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 blah. And so we just kind of got back, and right around the time I was trying to start my own music magazine in Philly, and you know, he wound up being at this magazine at CMJ, and he was like, well, you should come up here. I think they're looking to hire someone who knows the scene. So it's just this, you know, it's always like, it's kind of random. It's kind of like finding the opportunities, identifying, you know, when there might be a window open, a door left open, just a little crack for you, and then making sure once you're there that you're prepared to deliver on that and that you do deliver on that. But, you know, I mean, there were probably 100 people that wanted that job at CMJ. I'm hiring an assistant right now, which is not a writing job at all. And there's like, in like the space of 3 days, we have like 300 resumes. You know, it's just like, yeah. So, you know, you have to figure out, a lot of it is who you know, and a lot of it is, but it's not like who you know, like you have to know the president of a company. You just got to figure out a way to get your foot in someplace. And then once your foot is there, and I didn't, you know, again, man, I was living in Philly. That's a whole other story. But I was working at a job as like in PR, and I was making about $35,000 a year in Philly, and my house with a front yard and a backyard, and you know, cost $800 for 3 different roommates to split. And I moved to New York to take this job for $15,200 a year, and I paid more than what I paid to rent that house, to rent this closet in Queens. But you just do it because you think that, you know, you're going to make good on this opportunity. I didn't move there so I could rent a closet in Queens. I moved there because I wanted to kind of have that shot. So, you know.
So, but after a period of time at CMJ, you decided to leave.
Yeah, yeah. I've always, I think it's always good to really push yourself. And, you know, I never studied journalism. I was an English major. I just kind of learned writing by paying close attention to the people that were good writers. We had that reverse commute. CMJ was based out in Long Island, and you know, I had like a 35, 40-minute train ride every day, and all the people would come in from Long Island and leave all their newspapers on their seats, and I'd come onto the train and basically make sure I had like a New York Times, a Long Island Newsday, and probably a New York Post, and I'd just mark out of them with a red pen, you know, and really kind of understand like what was the lead and what was the, you know, we call it the nut graph, like the second in paragraph where you kind of deliver the goods, and, you know, and how did they structure it, and what was the first quote, and how did they end the story, and if they were talking about X, Y, and Z, how did they structure that? I mean, just really kind of study. That was my text. And so after about 2 years at CMJ, I mean, it was a small magazine, and I was an asshole. So, you know, and I say that meaning like I was always really impatient. I just wanted to do more and more and more and more and more. So I was doing like, you know, I was copy editing, but then I wanted to be like assigning, you know, stories. And as soon as I was assigning stories, I wanted to be assigning like the biggest stories. And then I wanted, you know, it's just like always just wanting to do more and more. I was starting to do a lot of freelance around that time, you know, writing for some other publications. And yeah, after about 2 years, 2.5 years at CMJ, I felt like I probably wasn't going to learn much more there. And so I jumped off and wanted to become a freelancer.
No income. I mean,
Well, no, it wasn't no income. The CMJ New Music Monthly, which I don't even know if I don't think it really exists anymore, but they promised me that I could take over the dance music column for the monthly magazine. So that was $100 a month, and Chuck Eddy at the Village Voice told me that I could write a story about, at that time it was kind of like a bubbling up notion in media was rock en español, and so he said I could. They were launching a I think it's called Rock and Enya. They were launching a festival in New York, like a bunch of folks from the Latin music business were launching a festival in New York, and I was allowed to write that piece too, which I knew nothing about, but I kind of talked my way into. And that was going to pay me about $300, and so that was enough. I felt like I had an in at the Voice, and I had this column as a little bit of a foundation, and I was doing some freelancing for some folks, and so I jumped off. But, again, like with the opportunity, about a year in at CMJ, probably not even, someone, and again, this is like 90, end of 98 probably, someone emailed me something called an MP3. And I was like, and I like opened it and music played. I think it was, I don't remember what it was now. I'm not even gonna lie. I could totally make up something that's like awesome, but I'm not going to. It was a super underground track from DJ Shadow. But someone emailed me an MP3, and I mean, it was crazy. I mean, it was like, whatever. It was really before that time. I mean, right away, like the IT guy, I think I shut down like the servers in all of Long Island. Like right away, this IT guy came running over. He's like, "What did you do? We have like packet load issues." And I was like, and then right after that, Napster started, and I was probably one of the first few thousand people on Napster. And if I did one smart thing in my career, you have to understand, you have to figure out what your opportunities are. Do you see what happens when I speak the truth? I come with my own soundtrack. I go like this, and then you have to figure out what your opportunities are, because, I kind of always thought I wanted to be a music journalist and like the guy that was like reviewing shows and telling people what albums were good and whatnot. And it turned out when I really started doing that I didn't really enjoy that. I didn't really enjoy it, and I don't think I was really great at it. And I also learned very quickly that there were like 4 or 5 music publications or publications at all that really had full-time jobs for music critics, and they were all staffed by guys that were like 50 years old and weren't going anyplace. And it just didn't seem like there was a lot of opportunity for that. So when Napster came out, and I thought it was amazing, this service that you could go to. I mean, now it's like, duh, you can go online, you can hear whatever you want to hear everywhere. But at the time, it was, it was mind-blowing, this notion that you could go onto some service and find any song that you wanted to find. Not only that, but like B-sides of that song and live versions of that song from Switzerland, and then like the backup band doing a cover version. I mean, it was like everything was here. And I thought, I didn't understand for the life of me why that wouldn't be legalized. Like, why wouldn't the labels just make that like a real service? And so I started asking those questions. I talked to people at record labels, like, well, why aren't it? And very quickly what happened is I kind of became as interested in the technology and the delivery platform as I was in the music itself. I'm still very passionate about this music to this day, but that was really a pivotal moment. And so what I started doing at that time was I started writing about music technology. I started writing about the music business, and there was really no one doing that. So I had kind of an open lane. I was literally like 6 months removed from teaching myself journalism by reading about it in newspapers. And I was writing for like the Washington Post, and I was writing for the Village Voice, and very quick, and I started, as a freelancer, very quickly I started writing for like the New York Times and lots of other magazines, because there was just no one, everyone wanted to write about music, but no one wanted to write about the business. No one wanted to write about the technology. And so that was an opportunity for me, and I kind of knew it. And I think if I had just kept on writing about bands or indie bands or whatever, there's no way I would have been able to make it as a freelance journalist.
So New York Times, Wired, Village Voice.
Yep.
It's a good time.
It was a great time. I mean, I was a freelancer for about 5 years, and it was, I mean, sometimes you go a little bit crazy when you're working from home, but it was great. I mean, again, I kind of underachieved as an undergraduate, and for me, this was like carte blanche to call up the smartest people in the world and ask them questions all the time. So if I was like really interested in like biodiesel, I'd find someone to assign me a story on biodiesel, and I'd like talk to the people that invented biodiesel engines and like figure out how that worked. When I bought my apartment in Queens, this was one of the best things that I ever did. I got Time Out New York to create a real estate issue and then let me do like 2 features in it, one about buying an apartment in an outer borough and one about finding the way to get your best mortgage. So basically I got them to pay me a few $1,000s to do all the research that I had to do in order to buy my apartment. It was like, you know, it was good. And then, you know, the music and the technology stuff just kept kind of taking off. It was
Then how did you get hooked up? You became an associate editor at Rolling Stone.
Yeah, well, I've been, you know, again, when you're a freelance journalist, you do kind of what you need to do to get, you know, to get the bills paid. I kind of worked out a formula in my head where every assignment, I mean, for a year, I just kind of struggled, and I like wrote for anyone that would let me write for them, and you know, ate a lot of peanut butter. And then, you know, I kind of started to have this little formula where it either had to be a story I really wanted to write, a story that paid me really well, or a publication that I really wanted to write for. And any assignment I took had to meet two of those three things. And that's when I kind of started to focus a little bit more. With Rolling Stone, you know, I was out a lot. And Rolling Stone, you know, they're always looking for people to like do a good job with their random notes page. Again, like little opportunities, you know, random notes is, you guys all know what random notes is in Rolling Stone? I don't even know if people read Rolling Stone anymore. How many people here subscribe to Rolling Stone? Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people used to.
It's a magazine for your parents.
It's a magazine for your parents. I subscribed to Rolling Stone growing up. And so, you know, when you subscribe to a magazine growing up and then they give you the opportunity to work there, you kind of take it. I mean, they basically offered me a job paying me what I was making as a freelancer, but, you know, it was Rolling Stone and they wanted me to cover like business and technology. I started out writing for the random notes section and then just kind of had a relationship with them, and they were looking to hire someone who wrote about the music business, and so I think that was a no-brainer. And I was there for, you know, only like a year, and then I was doing a panel for NARP, what was that, National Association of Recording Industry Professionals. They had a panel on like the media, and so it was me, and it was Elise Gardner from USA Today, and it was Ken Schlager, who was the executive editor at the time of Billboard. And you know, I guess a few weeks later he called me and said, hey, you know, it was good to meet you on that panel. You know, we're hiring this news editor at Billboard, you know, we'd love to have you come over. And I said, no way, and that was the end of it. And because I was at Rolling Stone, I didn't really want to go to Billboard, and like the notion of writing for a trade, I didn't really, you know, it just, I don't know. And the magazine, as you said, I mean, it wasn't a great magazine at that point in time. It was a little unfocused. It had kind of lost its way a little bit with some of the quality of the writing, I think, and I think it had kind of lost its way a little bit with recognizing some of the changes that were going on in the business. And all I knew is that I was like the guy who was responsible for covering the music industry, first as a freelancer for like a lot of top publications, and then at Rolling Stone, and I never read Billboard. So I was like, if I'm doing this job and I don't have to read Billboard, then who has to read Billboard? But anyway, you know, I mean, the way Ken presented the job to me, it was kind of like Billboard is awesome, and you would be lucky to come work at Billboard. And Ken's a great guy, by the way, and he was an important mentor to me in different ways. But that didn't resonate with me. But then his co-executive editor, Tamara Conniff, who was kind of young and I don't think she would mind me saying, a feisty woman, she called me and she said, hey, Ken told me about you and says you're not interested, and you know, will you meet me for breakfast? And we sat down, and she was kind of like, hey, Billboard is totally fucked, and I need you to come here and help me fix Billboard. And you know, and even then I wasn't going to do it, but you know, it was kind of like I was in a position where I could hold off. So I was like, well, you know, I talked to my wife about it. I was like, if they get to like X and Y as an offer, I'd be an idiot not to take that. And they got to X and Y, so I took it.
And then that was when you were made senior news editor.
Yep.
And then after that, they promoted you up to deputy editor, and now today you're the executive editor.
Today I was deputy editor, then executive editor, and now I'm the editorial director. So today, at the time, I managed the news section in the print magazine,
Right.
and I oversaw this Billboard.biz kind of business website. And
Any of you been to that website yet? Good.
so have you been to, how many, there's two websites, right? There's Billboard.com and there's Billboard.biz. How many of you have been to Billboard.biz? It's a terrible, it's like the worst website you can possibly find. It's got some good information, but like, it's a terrible website. We're redesigning it. We're like, I've hated that website for like 3 years now. So we've got big plans for it. I think it's going to be we want to make it a website that looks more like what a website should look like, and does the things a website should do in 2010 instead of looking like, you know, like a GeoCities page from like 1996. I can't believe you guys get the GeoCities reference. You guys are way too young to get that. Yeah, so now what I do is I oversee and am responsible for the editorial strategy of the weekly print magazine, the the daily bulletin that we send out, the daily newsletter, the Billboardcom, which we redesigned in July of last year and has really taken off in some cool ways, and also all of our conference and events programming. So anything basically that is editorial, and then there's some other fun odds and ends, but that's basically it.
So the transition from consumer to trade press.
Yep.
So how do you view the function of a trade press? Back in the day, long before you were there was always like the perception or the mantra was a trade publication, particularly in the entertainment industry, not supposed to say bad things, always like, speak in superlatives. Obviously that's not the case anymore, but how do you define the difference between consumer and trade?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I think fundamentally a trade magazine's job is to help that industry find itself, to help that industry have the information and analysis that it needs to do business. The thing that's interesting about that is, I think 15 years ago, Billboard defined that industry as record labels primarily. Right? It all kind of started with the record labels, and that was the life flow of the music business. Everything.
It's also the cash cow revenue that kept the magazine.
Well, in fairness, it didn't have to be, right? Touring was big business then still, but yeah, it was the easiest, and publishing was big business then, but it was the cash cow for Billboard certainly. Right. And over the last 15 years, it's no secret what's happened to record labels. So it's been kind of, for Billboard, I think, and this started before my time, it's been a little bit freeing in that regard, right? It's been simultaneously scary because you have to realize that your revenues are dwindling from this source and you better develop new revenues, but it also means that you're not suckling at the teat of the major labels anymore.
Right, which was always the problem, is if you said something that might have been the truth but offended somebody, they could pull that trade ad.
Yeah,
and then the head of sales would come in and go, oh, what'd you just do?
Yeah.
I just lost that.
Yeah, it definitely, I'm sure that happened plenty of times. At the same time, you were telling me a story on the way over here about pulling ads for, a year and a half. It's like the money was so flush back then, especially when you got to the late 80s and the early 90s when everyone was just replacing their entire music collection with CDs. The labels were minting cash, and if someone stopped advertising, someone else would start. But that said, generally, you're absolutely right. Billboard was pretty beholden to major labels, and they didn't want to challenge major labels. Now what's interesting is, Billboard then I think defined the music industry largely as record labels. Now I define the music industry, we have clear verticals, right? We're looking at publishing, we're looking at touring, we're looking at film and TV because sync licensing has become such an important part of the music business. Publishing, touring, we're looking at our Latin business is one of the most successful parts of our business. International, obviously digital and mobile, and in that mix comes record labels. So, to me, it's just as important that we're helping digital services understand how to get what they need from a record label as it is that we're helping record labels understand, what the prevailing tech trends are. And so, yeah, I don't think we pander to anybody. I do think that our mission as a trade magazine is, again, to help people do business. But we're not going to help anyone do business by giving them a hand job in the magazine. That's not, it doesn't help anyone do business. If I sit there and I say, oh, this band that sucks is the most awesome band ever, that's not going to help anyone do business. If I say this company that has a really dumb business model is run by a genius, it's not going to help anyone do business.
But what about the review section? You still review the current new singles and some of the new albums?
Yeah, we do. We do still review. The main reason we still review is because we have had such developed success on Billboardcom, and our reviews do really well there. People want to come and read about what music is out and what music is coming. There's certainly, I think that once upon a time, so it's kind of interesting. To think about how business models change. Probably 10 years ago, Billboard's primary function, the print magazine I'm talking about, was connecting this empire of record labels over here, right? There were a bunch of big labels, and even the indies. There were so many big, powerful record labels with lots and lots of money, and hundreds of people at each of those labels that had budgets and spending authority and blah, 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 blah. And over here you had all these physical retailers, Again, I mean, it wasn't consolidated, it wasn't fully compressed, they hadn't gone through all these difficulties. I mean, I'm talking in the 90s with the CD replacement. It was a booming business, and there were hundreds of important chains that were, small regionals and things like that, on up to the big boxers. And what Billboard really did was they kind of connected those two empires. And again, at the retailers, you'd have like 4 different buyers at one store, that all needed to know what the label priorities were, and they'd use Billboard to understand that.
And they wouldn't carry they would only carry if it was on the Billboard chart.
Yeah, exactly. So what Billboard said was really important to connecting record labels and record stores at a time when there were, so many of both, and you had all these thousands of people with buying authority and budgets at both of them. Billboard, that was where Billboard existed. And now both of those empires have crumbled to dust. You've got 4 major labels, some would joke 3. You've got, 3 physical retailers that matter anymore, and their shelf space keeps getting smaller and smaller. And by the way, at those physical retailers, you've got one guy in a suit somewhere and not there making buying decisions about what's going to be in all of his stores, right? So this notion of tens of thousands of people that needed to read Billboard to understand what the priorities were, it's all gone.
And the other important thing.
So that's where reviews were really important, I think, because they, the retailers would say, oh, there's like this record, and I need to.
So now why?
Now why do the reviews?
Yes.
Well, I think a number of reasons. One is, again, I'm really focused on making sure Billboard is relevant to the new music business, and so that means, making sure that the music supervisors who make all the sync licensing decisions at film and TV studios are reading Billboard. It means that making sure that the CMOs at all the major brands who are looking for what music to feature in their campaigns are reading Billboard. You get where I'm going, the digital services and the ad agencies and all these people that make the decisions that now generate the lion's share of revenue for music. They all need to be reading Billboard. And I think it's helpful for them to see, like, oh, these are the releases that are out this week. These are the releases these are the singles that are impacting radio. I think it's just a little snapshot of like what's going on. We don't review, obviously we don't review everything. We have 2 pages of reviews. We don't review anywhere close to anything, but what we try and do is let people know that these are the biggest releases this week. And we've toned it down a lot. I mean, when I look back at Billboard from 6 years ago or whatever, the reviews were pretty pandering. They would take terrible records and find, it was like the classic, like backhanded compliments. They take like a terrible record and be like, but the mastering was really good or whatever. They'd find something nice to say about almost anything.
Well, that was the publicist's job, was to get the record reviewed in Billboard and hopefully with a positive spin. Yeah,
there wasn't a lot. If that was the publicist's job, I would say that was a pretty easy job. There wasn't a lot of negative reviews in Billboard. And now we will,
there were a lot of people jockeying for the
space. That's right.
And, and the other thing with Billboard always was, and I remember my first job out of college, it was important to get your name and if you got your picture in the executive turntable, which kept track of who was hired, who was fired, who was promoted. It was that. And then the apex of success was if Billboard printed your picture. Receiving some sort of award, or you're at some radio station, because the picture or the news editor at the time was inundated with photos from, every time somebody gave a plaque, they were like,
they wanted it printed.
That sort of has fallen by the wayside. I don't see a whole lot of those kinds of photos anymore.
We're going to find ways to, unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of platinum records anymore to give out plaques for. We still get a lot of those photos, though. I mean, everyone does their events and everyone does their, radio station appearances and things like that, and they all want those photos in Billboard. We're going to be working on some better ways to capitalize on that, I think, in the coming months. But when I first got to Billboard from Rolling Stone, there was still a lot of legacy thinking, both inside the magazine and in the industry, about what the magazine should be.
Of course.
And so, I'm not going to name names, but I'd get phone calls from people, like from the assistant to very important executive, and the call would basically go something like, very important executive flushed the toilet yesterday and there's a photo of that, can we get that into Billboard? And I would say, no, and then hang up. And you have no idea the like wrath I incurred early on over this, because basically what happened, again, media was changing. I started at Billboard in 2005, in the spring of 2005, as the news editor. And when I got there, again, you have to keep in mind, like I was writing breaking news stories for the New York Times about the music business, and then I was writing about the music business for a bi-weekly at Rolling Stone, and I hated that job. I hated the job. I love the people at Rolling Stone, but like I went from breaking news and like setting news cycles to like having to write these like 400-word versions of stories a week and a half later. And so I got to Billboard, and it was kind of like, well, we're a weekly news magazine, and they were filling this issue with next day news stories. Like, right, something would happen today, and let's say something happens on like a Friday. So then it's not going to get into the magazine until it comes out the following Friday. Most people aren't going to read it until Monday. So you're talking about people like reading your news story that you wrote as if it happened yesterday, like 11 days later. Right. And it's like, that's crazy. That's not a business proposition. You can't charge people $300 for, you know, for like badly written versions of the story they read in the New York Times 11 days ago.
But it would cost them money to hold the presses if something story broke Thursday night.
But you know, see, that's the thing. It wasn't about holding the presses. It was about changing the focus of the magazine. And so when these people would come and say, well, we need this, you know, and it wasn't about flushing toilets, right? It was like the kind of rote bullshit that record labels do all the time. Record labels would be like, well, we signed an artist. We want a story in Billboard. It's like, well, you know what? Like this year there's going to be like 7,000 artists signed to labels of any sort of repute. So I'm not going to run a story every time you sign an artist. And if you want, we can put a little news item about that on billboard.biz. And so at that time, in 2005, what it made sense to do was focus the print magazine on trend, on big picture, on access to the executives that maybe some of these news publications didn't have, and put the like next day news stories online on the internet where they kind of belonged. And now, by the way, that model is kind of out of date, and that's one of the things I'm struggling to figure out right now, because, you know, if you guys really care about the music business, who here remembers when, I don't know which parts of the business you study, so this isn't like a pop quiz or anything like that, but actually it is a pop quiz if you could take out your notebooks. Like, who here remembers when, what's a good example of this? Like, Apple bought La La. Anyone here know what I'm talking about when I say Apple bought La La? A couple people know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so more of you, by the way, should know what I'm talking about if you're interested in working in the music business, but, you know, maybe that's not a good example, but let's just say something important happens in the music business, particularly in like the tech sector. You know, this happens, whatever day it happens, within an hour, there's going to be really brilliant analysis of that story online on a couple different places. So if it's like a big digital story, I know I'm going to All Things D. I know I'm going to, where else am I going? Probably paid content. And I'm going to see what these people have to say about it. And you know, our notion up until relatively recently was, so we're gonna win by putting like better, smarter analysis in the print magazine than you can get anywhere else, you know. And yeah, people have the news in real time, but we're going to have the analysis. But now there's, you know, these companies, by the way, All Things D, paid content, a couple others, they're giving TechCrunch, you know, they're giving that away for free. They're giving away this really, frankly, trenchant and insightful analysis for free an hour after this event happens. So what's the space for Billboard to play in? You know, what are we going to put in our weekly magazine that's worth $299 a year? You guys, I think, can pay $108 for it. I'll be finding each of you after class. And that's, you know, that's what I struggle with. That's what I'm figuring out right now. And there aren't easy answers. Just like in the music business, there's no easy answers. So for me, it's about really finding a way to kind of unite these different parts of the business, bring them together, and kind of deliver some insight that makes sense to everybody.
It's a big challenge.
It's fun. It's great. I mean, this is why we do what we do. If it was easy, anyone could do it.
So you've been there 5 years.
Just about, yeah, 4.5 years.
So like any major entity, corporation out there, morphing, change, you've lived through several ownership changes.
I've lived through several ownership changes. In fact, I just lived through one in January.
So who owns you now?
Oh. Who owns me personally? My wife.
Right, no, I understand that. Sorry, I didn't
and boy, does she own me. Yeah, so there's a new company. When I started at Billboard, it was owned by a company called VNU, which was a public company listed on the Dutch exchange. VNU eventually was there was a stockholder revolt and they were forced to delist. They delisted, sold to private equity investors, and that company became Nielsen.
The same people that everyone would know familiar from television ratings.
Yep, Nielsen television ratings, Nielsen consumer metrics, Nielsen conferences, Nielsen. And they had a division in this company called Nielsen Business Media where Billboard was housed. At the end of last year, and this deal closed officially January 1st, a group of investors, one group called Pluribus and another group from Guggenheim, who's a major equity player, bought the entertainment verticals from Nielsen Business Media. Nielsen wanted to get out of the business media game. They didn't see opportunity in it. It didn't fit with what they were doing, and they didn't want to invest in it. And so we were bought by this new company, and the new company's called E5. I'm told they're going to try and change that name. I hope they do. And what they did is they bought Billboard, The Hollywood Reporter, Adweek, Media Week, Brand Week. The Clio Awards were part of that, which is the awards for television commercials, and a couple other properties. And that's the core of this new company. And I think they're going to look to add some properties possibly, but what they're really looking to do is turbocharge the business. I mean, when I was at Nielsen, it was all about, and Nielsen was very good to me, by the way. They invested in me. They gave me a lot of really good sort of like leadership and management training, and not like the kind of wonky kind where you like go off into the woods and someone catches you and you fall down, but like really kind of thoughtful stuff. They like hooked us up with some really smart people, and they invested in leadership, which was, I think, very cool for a company. But at Nielsen, working at a brand within Nielsen Business Media, all it was about was this thing you're doing, how can you do it for 10% less money? And then when you'd like figure that out, as soon as you got to like that point, they'd be like, that is awesome. How can you do it for 10% less money? And you'd be like, I mean, that was kind of the prevailing guidance. And then, so now, in really a very short period of time, it's very clear that this new company, I mean, listen, this is out there in the newspapers, so I'm not saying this is fact, I'm just saying it's out there in the newspapers. They bought these brands for like a 6 times multiple. You don't buy companies for a 6 times multiple and then look to cut costs. You've got to grow those brands by an exponential amount so that one day when you want to flip the companies, you're going to make a lot more money than you paid for it. So it's gone from like, how can you do that for 10% less, to how can you spend $3 million and make me $5 million, which is like a whole different way of thinking. But that's the equity world. That's the it's a lot more pressure, but it's also like we finally have the opportunity to try some of these ideas that we've had and to come up with new ideas and have them financed. So it's going to be an interesting time at Billboard, and I think at this company over the next few years.
So you alluded to this or talked about it for a sec, but how do you, in a print medium, stay on the cutting edge given the current environment now?
Yeah, I mean, how do I keep the brand on the cutting edge?
Sorry, how do you keep the brand?
You keep the brand. Yeah, I mean, I think we're doing. I have no idea, man. I think we're doing pretty good work with the print magazine. I'll say that. Like, it's going to continue to evolve, and I think it's going to continue to evolve into sort of being as timeless as it can be, rather than being so concerned with being timely, if that makes sense. So, on any given time when you're following the evolutions of the music business, there's certain things that are happening. There's certain trends that are kind of in the air, right? Like right now, everyone in the music business is talking about streaming music and whether or not streaming music is going to be the answer to the music business woes. Right now, everyone in the music business is interested in whether or not radio is going to get a performance royalty, for the artist, and like how much money that would generate. Right now, everyone in the music business is interested in whether or not there's a way to create like an ISP tax and generate like $5 a head on everyone in the world, and what that would mean for the music business. These are like kind of almost evergreen issues right now, and they have a life cycle, but right now, while that's what the buzz issue is, we can report that to death because people want to know everything about those issues because it may mean a windfall of cash for their businesses. Right now, broadly, like what apps are coming out and which apps do people need to know about? So my point is sort of like it's less about breaking news, right, in the print magazine, and it's more about sort of making sure cyclically what the major trends are and who are the major people and what are the major trends, and delivering that in spades week after week. And also just, one of the things I definitely imported into Billboard, because again, when Ken Schlager sent me those first couple of issues when I was at Rolling Stone, I mean, this stuff was like drier than sawdust. It was like, I couldn't be made to care less about some of these things that I actually did care about. Come on in. So, I think a lot of it comes back to importing some of like what I knew from the consumer media space and bringing it to, like just storytelling, right? Like, I mean, I think you're going to have Lady Gaga's the songwriter here next week, right?
Her producer, right? Rob Fusari.
Rob Fusari. And, we have a Q&A in this issue with Rob Fusari, And to me, it's like fascinating. Like it's kind of exists on its own as like just like a really good story and a really fascinating interview. And that's like a lot of what the print magazine's about. I mean, in terms of digital, we have a very clear sense of what we need to do. We're just not doing it right now. You know, I've got to make some changes. You know, we made a decision. I came into this job about 1.5 years ago, and the first decision that Howard Applebaum, the publisher of Billboard, and I made together was that what we were going to tackle, and a few other people there, what we were going to tackle was Billboard.com, because we felt that was an immediate opportunity, that as a consumer brand, Billboard was kind of languishing, and that it actually had a lot of potential. And when we redesigned that site, I mean, that was like a 6-month process. We worked with Razorfish, who's one of the top you know, agencies. We worked with iCrossing to really maximize the SEO on the website, search engine optimization. So we relaunched in July. So that was probably like in January of 2009 when we made the decision. In like July of 2009, we did the relaunch. And in July of 2009, when we relaunched, we were getting about 4.2 million uniques on a trailing 30-day period. And now we're up to 6.4 million uniques. The line is going like this. Our time on site has increased by like 95%. Every metric that you can use. Page views have literally doubled now on a month-over-month basis. Excuse me, on a year-over-year basis, page views have doubled. We just really embraced the notion of being a consumer site. So I think that was a very successful move for us. We did it. It's generated a lot more revenue than that site was generating. You know, we sell that site on. I mean, I don't know how much you guys are into this part of the business, but you know, we've raised our CPM pretty substantially. We've just maximized that business as an opportunity.
I'm hearing you use all these phrases and terms. It's fascinating because I expect you to be a journalist, editor.
Yeah, I expected that too.
And these are not terms that.
Yeah, shit ain't like that anymore.
I mean, you don't have ink on your hands, and you're talking about you know, CPMs and optimization of search engines. It's just.
Yeah, it's funny. I think about this. I mean, my wife and I talk. My wife's also a journalist, and we talk about this all the time. It's like, when I started as a journalist, I was literally helping to cut. You know, it's like if you're into music, like once upon a time, you know, you cut audio tape and you spliced it together, and that's how you made records. Like, you know, when I started as a journalist, literally we had like a wax table, and we'd like cut out articles and like, you know, use the wax board and like literally paste them onto paper, and that's what got sent to the. And now it's like what I do, on one hand, has almost. I mean, the strategic stuff that I do, like sitting down with my top editors, right? I have a guy that runs the day-to-day of the weekly print magazine. I have a guy that runs the day-to-day of Billboard.com. And by the way, the guy that runs the day-to-day of Billboard.com, his name is Ty Comer. He's the guy that was the waiter in Bennigan's. So shit goes around. Just keep that in mind. Don't burn bridges. You should write that down and double underline it. Don't pander, by the way, but just be a good person and keep your relationships. So, you know, I've got a guy that runs .com and a guy that runs, you know, and I've got another guy that helps me with the programming. And when I sit down with them and we talk sort of big picture strategically about, well, you know, the magazine needs to do more of this and less of that, and we need to really, let's try and get so-and-so for the cover, that feels like journalism. But like 75% of what I do, by the, you know, by the old world definition of journalism, it feels like it has almost nothing to do with journalism.
But you do still get a chance to be a journalist and do an editorial
Yeah.
and actually, you know, write stuff. So, you know, without asking you to regurgitate your editorial from the 23rd of last month, you had an editorial I found fascinating, 2010, the new baseline. You know, growth, to put it into a soundbite, growth versus stabilization. I wondered if you could sort of like expound on that for a second for the class.
Sure, yeah. You're going to make me talk about math after 7 p.m.
No, don't. Don't
talk about math. Well, basically it's this notion that, so, you know, 99 or 2000, depending on whose numbers you use, was the peak of the music industry. That was the year when, you know, again, CD purchasing mixed with all the other formats that were still for sale, mixed with the furor over Britney Spears and NSYNC, mixed with a lot of different factors, gave the music business its like best year ever. I mean, it was ridiculous how much money the music business made that year. And the global music business at that peak was worth about $30 billion. The global recorded music business at its peak was worth about $30 billion.
This is what year?
This was like 99, 2000. Does anyone know what the global music business is worth now, recorded music? It's worth a little bit more than that. It's like 18 billion. I mean, I'll check where the dust settled this year, but it's gone from like 30 to 18 in 10 years. So that's not so fun for people that work in the music business. So what I wrote about, because every year, again, I mean, I've been following this business. I basically got into writing about the music business, and then it immediately started to suck. You know, and I don't think I'm to blame for that, but I do think that it's uncanny that like the first year I started covering the music business was like the last good year it had, and every year since then has been like this. And again, I'm just talking about recorded business. There's plenty of other parts of that. So I think that, you know, year after year, people be like, for the first couple years, I remember this, in like 2002, 2003, 2004, the music business dropped like 6%, 7%, 8% in recorded sales. And people were like, oh, it's like, you know, it's not good, but it's not the end of the world. And then in 2005, I believe, it was flat to 2004. And people were like, see, it's done, we're fine. No problems at all in the music business. And then in 2006, it dropped 19%. And then every year since then, it's dropped like, you know, 19, 15, 20, 14%, just giant chunks out of the bottom line of recorded sales every year. And every year people are like, I think we've hit the bottom. Eternal optimists, you know, Phillies fans and music business types. But I finally, you know, we were kind of looking at the math. What happened is the American Society of Magazine Editors asked me to do a presentation. A guy who I actually had worked with in the past was now running as me, and he said, I want you to do a presentation on the death of the album and why magazine publishers should be interested in that. I thought it was a really interesting topic because it was this notion of sort of content on different platforms, but yet what are the lessons learned from this collapse? And I asked for that presentation, I asked some folks in my office to pull together some numbers for me, and they created this chart of what happened when, I should have brought this chart today, and I can send it to you as a you know, as a file if you'd like to share it in the future.
Thank you.
But what I asked for basically was, I used the RIAA shipment numbers, because the SoundScan numbers don't go back this far, on basically the lifespan of vinyl, the lifespan of cassettes, the lifespan of CDs, and the lifespan of, so just year over year, how many of each of these formats sold. And what you see when you see it worked out over time is albums basically, you know, start at very little and kind of have their peak and then start to die. And right as albums are starting to die, cassettes start to rise. So they forms this neat X, and then cassettes rise. And at the peak of cassettes, that peak goes up, you know, about twice as high as albums. And then cassettes start to fall, and CDs start to rise. And CDs at their peak are like 3 times what cassette hit. So you have these perfect sort of, you know, mirrored kind of upside down Vs of just like, it's great, old format, new format, dramatic growth, decline, but completely offset by dramatic growth. And you see CDs go all the way up to here, and then starting in 2000, you see it like plummet, you know? And then at the very bottom of this graph, you see digital sales, and it's like this. Like that's it. It's like this little tiny line that goes up. But I started looking at that line, and I really started kind of crunching the numbers, and what became clear was we were, in fact, getting close to the point where we were going to hit this new baseline. That CD sales had finally fallen enough that digital growth, given conservative estimates in the next year or two, should kind of create a new baseline of recorded music. Now, I mean, that's not a, you know, don't go out and buy your house based on that information, because you know, there were a couple assumptions that I built into this. One was the notion that digital growth was going to continue, not at the rate that it has been over the last few years, because it is definitely slowing down, but that it was going to continue. Now, already this year, we're seeing signs that it may not continue, that digital growth itself may have pretty much stopped, and that the size of the population that's willing to buy digital music may be pretty much what it is right now. Now, I think it's going to grow a little bit more if you're just looking at, like, you know, buying MP3s. And the other assumption was that, you know, CDs would continue to drop at about a similar rate, and that seems to be holding true. So my only point was, once you have, you can't build a floor of a business. You can't even build a business model if your business is at all exposed to recorded music. You can't build a business if you have no idea where the bottom is. And my point in this piece was, I think finally, and I know, I mean, like I said, I make fun of people who've been saying this for years, but I believe, looking at the numbers, that the recorded music business is getting pretty close to the bottom. That it's like pretty much in the next like 18, 20 months that it's gonna level out, and that'll be the new baseline. So where you build from there, that's up to the business. People need to figure it out, and people need to, you know, like these things I talked about earlier that everyone's excited about, any one of those things falls jelly side up, as a good friend of mine says, and it could be a windfall of cash for the recorded music business. But, you know, personally, if I got out of this job and I was looking for a job in and around the music business, I would stay as far away from recorded music as I could. There's just so much uncertainty in that space. It'll work out eventually, but there's just so much uncertainty in that space. Legislative uncertainty, technological uncertainty, consumer uncertainty. It's like, I don't know.
There's applications to other media. Most recently, Glenn made the reference in Billboard Biz about newspapers.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, you know, if I left this business, I don't think I would go get a job in newspapers either. You know, I mean, some part of me really likes the challenge, right? Like, the thing I'm probably most proud of at Billboard, people assume that we must be, like, going out of business any day. And I joke about this sometimes when I speak at schools, right? It's like, I'm at the intersection of the two worst industries in the history of the world. It's like the music business and the journalism business. It's like I got a giant bullseye on my head or something. But over the last like 3 or 4 years, Billboard has actually grown as a company. And we've done that by diversifying, we've done that by doing all sorts of different things. You know, our print magazine circulation hasn't grown, but that's kind of the point, right? Like, you know, to me, the analogy there to like the record business is, well, the record companies didn't realize quickly enough that selling recorded music was not such a good business to be in. And while they had all the capital in the early part of the 2000s, that's when they really needed to be diversifying. That's when they really needed to be, you know, Irving Azoff left recorded music around that time. Who here knows who Irving Azoff is? Everyone knows who Irving Azoff is? If you don't know who Irving Azoff is, you should change your major. I'm just telling you straight up. You still have time to like look it up and figure it out, but like, you know, Irving Azoff basically left recorded music around this time, and he went to the management, and he went to the live side, like he went to where the money was. And every record company, like there was no law that said record companies couldn't become management companies. There was no law that said record companies couldn't become kazoo manufacturers. They could have done anything, really, except the thing they did do, which is to just keep doing the same thing, suing digital services and trying to protect their asset of recorded music.
In your, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you guys should interrupt me at any time. You guys have questions or whatever. I mean, I don't want to set the.
No, you know that's correct. Please feel free. Jump in.
I always look too that the lifespan of the LP was about 24 years. So let's say 1958 stereo to 1982.
Yep.
And we had at that point in 1958 to 1960 something, we also had a re-recording of the catalog.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had the cassette, but nobody really did a re-record. They didn't fill their library with cassettes. It was just a convenience thing. And then 1982, the CD came out. And if you give that 24 years, that's like 205, 206.
Right.
And we got down to a one configuration business too, because we used to have singles, and for what they were worth, we used to have singles and LPs.
Yep.
And by the year 2000, of course, or whatever it is, singles, we're down to one configuration.
Yep.
And a business of the size to be one configuration without a redoing of the catalog of the, I mean, the writing was on the wall basically. They never gave us a format that we wanted. They tried the DAT or
Yep.
D whatever it was.
SACD.
Yeah. And all that.
There's a whole lot of acronyms that all equal dumb.
Right. And they never gave us something that we really wanted. Mini CD came out.
Yep. Mini CD. That was a great idea. Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah.
It was almost like to me, it was like it was on the wall, that.
The one thing I will tip my hat to is the 8-track, by the way. You gotta love the 8-track. It's just like it's like so analog and so.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
But I mean, the handwriting was on the wall that with the one configuration, not a new something to stir interest. That something was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of believe, and this isn't to be mean to anybody, and there's lots of smart people, and the people that are left in the recorded music business now, I think they're the survivors. I think they're generally the smarter ones. I mean, there's certainly been some great people that have left, and they should still be in the recorded business because the recorded business needs people like that. I mean, it's a dramatic time of change in that industry, but I do think that when history looks back on the music business, on the recorded music business, I mean, it's not gonna be so kind. It's like up there with other industries as a representation of people who embraced their, being sort of out of date before it was necessary. Yeah. A lot of bad decisions were made. My favorite, by the way, is the notion that, as digital music started to become a reality, they were like, no one has the right to sell music that doesn't have DRM while they were selling CDs that had no DRM, right? So, I mean, there were so many things that made absolutely no sense. They were telling consumers that if you wanted to buy it digitally, you're going to have this like really annoying encryption, and it's going to make it difficult to play anywhere, and you can't move it around, or you can buy the CD and you can rip it and put it anywhere you want.
Right. At that one configuration.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they knew what to do.
They just didn't, the key people at the tops of these companies did not understand, and it's very difficult to understand. I read Billboard every week, and I talk to the people that are making the business happen every day, and there's things that like I struggle to understand all the time in the music business. Well, why is this, and this is that, or you know, I don't understand, like, you know, the royalties on this or this, but the royalties on that. Like, it's a very complex business sometimes, and the technology keeps it. I mean, it changes every day, and you have to keep up with it. And I think I'm a guy that came from a technology background, that came from a business background, and is really truly interested in and dedicated and employed to keep up with just keeping up with this stuff. And I struggle with it sometimes. So I can't imagine what it's like to be Doug Morris or Edgar Bronfman or any of these guys that, you know, especially in like 2003 when it was really hard to find good information and your company's unraveling in front of you, and like you've got, you know, you're in a boat with a hole like this big in the back of it that's digital music, and, you know, like Napster springs up and suddenly 25 million people in like no time at all are stealing your product in real time. It's like, I can't even imagine how terrifying that must have been for those people. And so I have a lot of empathy, but it seems pretty clear that a lot of the wrong decisions were made. Yeah.
Are you from Philadelphia or somewhere?
I grew up in Delaware.
Okay. You know the PRI building caught on fire the other day?
Did it really? Yeah. Oh, it's sad. I didn't see that.
Apartment from them. Anyways, the point is, so you think that, what do you think the consumer can value in music today? Do you think the consumer values recorded music, and if they do, how much of it, and if they don't?
Yeah. I'll tell you this, there's a couple things that are clear to me. One is consumers clearly value the live music experience. Like, you know, I mean, I go to Bonnaroo, I go to South by Southwest, I go anywhere I can go to hear good live music, and there's an awful lot of people there enjoying it with me. You know, you're seeing certain concerts. I mean, you know, what Ticketmaster and Live Nation and that company is doing to the touring business, and AEG, you know, like the consolidation within touring has resulted in some tours failing miserably, or too much pressure to get certain acts into venues that are too big for them, and then those things collapse. But when a tour is geared properly, I mean, it's like a wonderful. I saw Lady Gaga at Radio City. And it was like, I mean, it was an amazing show. It was a phenomenal show. She could be playing Madison Square Garden right now, and instead she's like holding off and building that, you know. And I think that's really smart. So I think live music is an incredibly valuable proposition. You know, if you're gonna ask me do consumers value music, I mean, I'll tell you that last time I checked with like Big Champagne, there's like 12 billion files being stolen a month. I'll tell you that everyone you know is walking around with like a gazillion gig iPod, and it's filled with music. You know, I kind of believe that consumers value music. I kind of believe that if I went around and I took everyone's iPods, that there'd be a lot of sad people. So the question is, how do you monetize that value? Because it's really tough to compete with free. So, you know, and there's no good numbers on this. I mean, you know, Big Champagne is a company that tracks illegal file trading data, but their whole business model is predicated on being a company that tracks illegal file trading data. So of course they're going to have the numbers, but I don't know how, you know, how much their math totally stands up. But beyond that, it's like, you know, I mean, I had another friend that got an iPad, and another friend of mine, as a gift, gave him 80 gigs of music. Just gave him 80 gigs of music. My dad's been a music fan for all his life, and will never own 10 gigs of music, right? And like, in 10 minutes, this guy handed him 80 gigs of music. I mean, that's insane. A, you're not going to listen to 80 gigs of music. I don't care. That's like an awful long time. B, there's probably not 80 gigs worth of good music, period. But more to the point, you know, people are handing over, this is like, you know, sideloading or whatever you want to call it. People can hand over like entire lifetime music collections now in like 10 seconds, and there's no policing that. So you kind of have to give, I think, personally, that and I hate to say this, and I've kind of, my own thinking has evolved on this, but you kind of have to give up the notion that you're going to charge people for music. That doesn't mean that you should stop charging people for music today, and for all the people out there that are willing to pay the way they're paying right now, because that's what they want that direct transactional experience, then you should still be taking their money, and you should be finding ways to maximize that as a business proposition. But I do think you're going to see a lot more of sort of music being hidden into things, right, and sort of paid for that way. So maybe like Prince a couple years ago, you know, bundled his album with, you know, concert tickets. So if you bought his concert ticket and you opted in, you'd get his album. You know, I think you'll see more of that. I think you'll see, you know, whether it's bundled in, you know, you get T-shirts with like, you know, USBs on them, or T-shirts even just with like codes to go download. So if you get your favorite band's T-shirt, it comes with the album. Lots of things like that. But I also think that's why there's a lot of interest right now around, you know, ad-supported services, whether it's Spotify in the UK or it's, you know, Pandora here in the US. It's like the notion of taking recorded music and finding ways to monetize it without making people pay for it. But at the end of the day, nothing's going to get the industry back to where it once was. Nothing's going to get the industry out of like where it is now, outside of, I would say, finding a way to, you know, sort of create this ISP tax.
Somewhere in there, there's a loss of a cultural experience where people in my generation, perhaps in your generation, could spend a couple of hours on a weekend or an evening in a record store.
Oh God, yeah, 100%. I mean, well, I'm of two minds of that. One is sort of the nostalgic mind, because I had my set of experiences with Rainbow Records on Main Street in Newark, Delaware, and if that record store didn't exist, like, I would probably have a completely different life right now.
Right.
You know, I was like not cool. I'm not cool now, by the way. Like, no, I mean, seriously, like, there's nothing cool about being cool. It's like such a lost game. But I was like such a dork, and like, and it wasn't even like, I mean, this was, I went to high school in like 86 through 90, 87 through 91. There was no, like, there wasn't even, I mean, there weren't even like cool kids. Like, when I say cool, I mean like, there was like alternative music wasn't reaching my school. So, you know, I mean, I literally, like, almost by accident went into this record. A guy was giving me a ride back from a restaurant job I had. Everything comes back to working in restaurants. A guy was giving me a job back from a restaurant job I had, and he had a cassette of 7 Seconds in his car. You know, the early kind of, I don't know, hardcore punk, you know. And I loved it. I hadn't heard anything like it in my life. And I was like, well, where do you get music? He was like, Rainbow Records. So I walk into Rainbow Records. I know nothing about music. And I was too afraid to talk to anyone. So every time I'd walk into Rainbow Records, I'd buy whatever they were playing, because it sounded really good to me, and I wanted to get out of there right away because I was scared.
But see, that was an experience you had with another person.
Yeah.
Okay, I think the digital medium doesn't allow that intercourse. It becomes a solo.
Well, see, this is the other thing I was going to say, though. I have to say I completely disagree, respectfully, but I do. Okay. I completely disagree. I mean, the other part of this is, so when I was in college, this would have been about 93 or 94. I was in a frat, and it's a terrible thing. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear it too. I'm going to die like 10 years younger because I was in this frat. So I was in a frat, and I had one fraternity brother who was like a visual arts student, and he took me with him to he had to go. This was back when you had to like go to computer labs to like access computers. I went with him to this computer lab, and I was like killing time, and I sat down at a random computer in this lab, and on the desktop there was an icon that said, at the time I pronounced it Vrave. I had no idea what this was. I was bored. I double-clicked the icon. It turned out to be an early Telnet chat, and it was basically you know, it was a Telnet portal into a real-time chat. Now nowadays that's like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like I am with like 100 people a day, but at that time it like blew my complete mind, right? Like chat, it was not something that was around. Right. I mean, the internet was kind of new. We were working on Mosaic as browsers. I mean, this was the early days, and because of that, I went up on this like chat, and I didn't know that you could Telnet from other computers. So like once a week, I'd go back to this one computer lab and double-click this icon, and you know, and I was basically talking to a bunch of ravers, and because it was V-Rave, it was virtual rave, and they were like ravers from all over the country.
And that's why you feel it's still.
It changed my life completely, because I wasn't into that music at all at that time. I've been through a lot of different music scenes. I mean, I grew up listening to like country and driving around in pickup trucks, and wound up, you know, I went through like hip hop, I went through, dance music. I went to Dead shows for a while. I was like really into like underground rock for a while. I mean, it's like, you know, I love scenes. I love the energy that comes with a bunch of people who are like discovering something together. That's like, that's pretty awesome. But so I found this like rave scene. That was like the next scene, and I kind of read about it a little bit. And you know, you know, Fox at 5 always did a really good job of making it sound like really terrible. Like, you know, do you know where your kids are? They may be at a rave, and they'd show pictures of, you know,
Right.
you know. But so suddenly I'm on this like telnet. I'm like talking to these people, and I made some of the best friends, and we talked about music, and we talked about politics, and I mean, that was the new coffee shop. And you know, within a year, I knew everything there was to know about. There were no raves in Delaware at this time, certainly. I don't think there ever, you know. But within a year, like I knew everything there was to know about raves, but I'd never been to a rave. And so, like, I mean, I knew the different styles of music, and I knew like who the cool DJs were, but I never heard any of it. So I went up going to one of the guys in the chat was he was like a little bit of a writer from New York, and he invited me up, and I went up there, and I went up going to. I mean, it was just. I mean, I don't know you all well enough to tell this whole story, but. You know, I wound up going to a nightclub, and it changed my life again. You know, but the connectivity of, I think there's a lot of people who grew up in the record store era and felt that deep personal connection of talking to people about music and sitting around like with this like vinyl album. And by the way, I have a turntable now and I love playing vinyl, but like sitting around with like, you know, their vinyl records and putting them on a turntable and talking about it and taking the time to enjoy that, and you know, going to the record store, and like that was one set of really meaningful experiences. And I don't think for a second that kids today who are on MySpace or Facebook or discovering music, you know, through any of the various you know, digital services that let you connect to other people, I don't think for a second that they're having any less meaningful experiences.
Okay.
I do. I think it can be a very powerful thing.
Have you had an opportunity to spend any late evening at either of the Apple stores in the city?
Sure. Yeah.
And to me, that's replaced that feely, touchy contact that a record store would provide.
Yeah, I think it's probably right. I mean, I think probably where that feely, touchy contact comes in is in the live experience. You know, again, like, you know, that's where you find your tribes. You know, I mean, you go to Gaga, and she's like, the thing that struck me about the Gaga show, I mean, I think Gaga's a brilliant songwriter. I think she's a brilliant artist, and for my money, she's like the Madonna / Elton John of this generation.
Correct.
And I don't hype a lot of people. I've spent a little bit of time with her. I've gone inside her head a little bit. I've seen her process, and I hear the songs she's written. I mean, I don't know if you, like right now on Billboardcom, we have, oh crap, I'm not gonna remember the name of the band. But we have this sort of series of bands doing covers of songs that are not native to the genre that they normally play. It's like this kind of almost like a live mashup kind of thing. So we've got a rock band doing a cover of, I think it's Just Dance, and it's great, and it really shows you the strength of that song. Right. You know, setting aside like the production, and she got this guy and that, it's like, no, it's just like a great song. But the thing that struck me when I went to this Gaga show was the community that was there. I mean, right, she appeals strongly to the gay community, and she appeals strongly to freaks. Like, they self-identify. And no, but I mean, I say freak as like a compliment, like, you know, and so all these people who feel like they're misfits, like she's their hero. And you go to that room and you could feel the like vibe in that place. I mean, it was like, if she crooked her finger like this, 6,000 people crooked their finger like that. If she said, you know, all my little monsters, I want you to stand up in your seat and box your own ears, then 5,000 people stood up in the seat and boxed their own ears. It was like, you know, and I think that's a very meaningful, or, you know, you go to Bonnaroo and you see, you know, the way people are hanging out and talking about this band or that band, and they want to pull each other, oh, you know, I got to take you over to this stage because I need you to hear this band, and, you know, I got to take you over here. And South by Southwest, same deal, you know. I mean, I think, I just think that, you know, yeah, I think live has become real important, and then I think a lot of that does happen in the digital space. You know, a lot of that does. I mean, I have chats all the time. Like, I will approve anyone who friends me on Facebook, and it annoys the shit out of the people that are like my real friends on Facebook. No, dude, honestly, like, go ahead. I don't even care. It's like, I'd love for you to do it, because, I mean, to me, it's like managing my own base of people. If I lose my job tomorrow, that's like 2,100 people I can reach out to and say, hey, everybody, you know me, like, got anything going on? Right? I mean, you know, it's not for nothing that artists and record labels and management companies and digital services, like the thing they all fight about, the real currency is data. The real currency is, you know, do you manage your band's fan list? Who owns those cell phone numbers that they import? Who owns those email addresses? Because you know what? When you get kicked off that record label, if your record label does, you're out of luck. You know, if you switch management companies and your manager does, you're out of luck. So who owns, you know, because everyone's happy to give data these days. You go on, you want to hear a track, you give your email address, your phone number, your mobile phone, whatever it is. But so to me, I like learn from that. I manage my, you know, I try and manage my own career the way I would give people advice to manage theirs. But all I'm saying is, you know, I have fascinating conversations all the time when I'm not always going to respond to you on Facebook because I do friend everyone and I don't have time to get back to everybody. But I have when I do, like I'll set aside an hour every day, or Twitter is another example of this. Like,
Big Twitter guy.
you know, I love Twitter. Oh, did you? You know, I love it. I love it because, you know, again, it's like when I first started writing, it was at the University of Delaware, and they offered me a column because I was like president of this fraternity, and they were like, "We'll let the dumb frat guy hang himself every week in like print." And it turned out that I like really liked writing, and there was a girl there that I wanted to meet at the school paper, who I'm married to now, by the way. Aww.
You closed.
I closed the deal. But no, I mean, you know, it's like kind of funny. I wound up with a career and a wife because I made that decision. Totally random. Like life is random. You just got to go with it and like kind of be prepared and, you know, be nimble. But my only point, what I'm trying to say is like with Twitter, with all these things, I have fascinating conversations, and there's a real community around these things. And I just think it's, you know, I think it's every bit as meaningful as, for the people that are a part of that, for the people that embrace it, I think it's every bit as meaningful as like what maybe probably you experienced in a record store.
I stand corrected.
Maybe not, you know?
Let's talk about this something in the magazine. So one big part of Billboard has always been the charts.
Yeah.
So how do you evaluate an artist's popularity in the current environment? I mean, the old school of like counting the number of vinyl albums that went over the cash register or the number of times a radio station played a record, those seem meaningful, but not really in a world where we just talked about,
Yep.
you know, pardon the phrase, tribes. I mean,
Yeah.
how does one, I mean, I know you're not stuck, but you've inherited a system that is old school where it's, you know, I mean, it's come a long way from where my job was to go up to Record World magazine with sales figures every week and say, here's what we, quote, shipped. And my boss would just inflate them because he wanted to do it and would think, you know, that they'd actually listen to Steve Leeds and use those numbers when in fact there was somebody in the next room who was calling those retail stores and getting actual piece counts. Wow, that was so innovative. They actually could tell how many they sold. But obviously with the technology, things have improved and such. But how do you quantify? How do you evaluate an artist's career? I mean, you know, we talked about Gaga.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but so is every record she's going to put out go to #1? I mean, and then
Yeah.
#1 in what way? How is that measured? What are the metrics?
I think that it's, I have to be careful I don't get myself in trouble. I think it's a challenge in today's world to find the right sources of meaningful and credible data to tell the story that people need told.
Right.
And so now that I've sort of double speaked around all of that, what I mean by that is that, you know, I think Nielsen SoundScan, for example, does a really good job of measuring sales of albums. If you want to know how many albums sold in America, you would be hard-pressed to find a better way of tracking that than Nielsen SoundScan. You could start from scratch right now and have all the money in the world, and you probably wouldn't get to a much better place at tracking the sales of albums than Nielsen SoundScan is at right now.
But then
The
record-wise, first week sales, it's like a movie opening.
Yep.
You have this huge opening first week. Oh my God, we sold 400,000 copies, and then you see it drop 60-80% the second week. What does that mean? It's not popular anymore?
I think, listen, everything. There's a couple. Okay, so there's a couple different questions there. I mean, if you're asking me about the cycle of like starting big and then falling off 40 to 75%, generally depending on your genre, right? Like, you know, R&B, rap tends to fall 75%.
Right.
Country tends to fall 50%. That's just the way it is. It's the nature of how people think about buying music and different styles of music, I think. I think it's probably the nature of the way it's promoted to some extent too, you know. But if you're asking me about like finding meaningful ways to track music, you know, I mean, I think that.
Or how do you gauge an artist's popularity?
Yeah, I
using
mean, I think the point
charts?
is, to me, like, let me take that back to Billboard and
Right.
say that what it means to me is we need to be doing a better job than we are of providing these different slices. There's no one slice anymore, right? Like once upon a time, I think in music, the only chart that mattered was the Hot 100 chart. If you had a single, like you needed it to be high on the Hot 100 chart, the singles chart, you know?
Do you know up until recently there were certain international record labels would not release in a domestic U.S. act overseas unless it had a top 10 single on the Billboard charts. That was
Yeah.
the criteria.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, it definitely, those charts were really important. And I think to a certain set of artists, you know, like, so there's the old world business, right? Where like the whole notion is you're gonna go into a studio with a bunch of other people. They're gonna help you make an album that sounds great. You're gonna spend a lot of money promoting it and to radio. And once it starts catching on at radio, you're gonna go out on the road and you're gonna seal the deal. And some artists still absolutely do that. They live and die by the hits. Britney Spears is an artist that still does business that way.
Right.
You know, and I think for those artists, that's still a really important equation. Like, are you selling albums or are you not selling albums? But, you know, for lots of other artists, and I think especially for indie acts, especially for, even at majors, right? I mean, once upon a time, if you didn't sell a million records, you were off a major. Now, like, majors are starting to find ways. Look at like a band like Kings of Leon, for example, that, you know, kept at it. I mean, all power to RCA for sticking with that band when a lot of labels wouldn't have at that
Right.
time. You know, 200,000 sold, 300,000 sold, finally they broke through.
And yet had huge success overseas before they
Yeah.
had success here.
But there's a lot of different ways. I mean, ultimately, it's just about how can an artist make money, right? That's what it fundamentally comes back to. Is there a way for this music to make money? And if the music is making money, then that's great. And we want to be charting the things that lead to people making money. So if you're an indie act and you have like this kind of Twitter engagement and this many fans on MySpace, like we need to be able to traffic in that in a different kind of way than we are right now. If you're, you know, huge on the social networks and blowing up there because everyone's adding you to their free playlists, but you're not selling music yet because maybe you don't even have an album out yet, you know, we need to be doing a good job of charting that over there. So I think, you know, and by the way, like live music, which is absolutely the lion's share of revenue generated in the business every year, no one really does a great job of charting that. We have our box score. What's the other one?
Polestar.
Polestar has their kind of, you know, their chart, but it's all mostly self-reported, right? It's
Well,
not,
it's like me going in and saying, here's what we sold.
Exactly.
It's like the promoter saying, here's
Yeah.
what I sold.
Meanwhile, there is a company out there, Ticketmaster, that basically knows what's being sold. So to me, one of my goals in the next year or two would be to get that data, convince them. I mean, then there's like antitrust issues and blah, 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 it's illegal, whatever, we'll figure it out. Like, you know, the data exists. I'd like to be able to present accurate data on what people are doing in the touring space. That would be really important for the business to have clarity about that. I think, you know, data on what's happening in social networks is really important. Data about what's happening, at least right now, on Twitter is really important. Finding ways to create charts out of this stuff is really important. I think we're going to be getting there. Even YouTube. I mean, you know, nowadays, if anyone, I mean, people expose new artists to me all the time. And they're like, you know, you should really check out so-and-so. And the first thing I do is I go to Google and I enter the band's name, and 9 times out of 10, I'll find music to listen to on YouTube.
Right.
The video is almost like not even the point. I just want to hear the song.
Right.
Yeah.
So, talking currency for a second, what's your read on what happened with J-Lo?
That's very current.
I assume most of you familiar with the Jennifer Lopez situation. Aside from her hosting Saturday Night Live this weekend and performing on Saturday Night Live as the musical guest, she has parted ways with her label,
Yeah.
Sony.
She's off a major right now. Yeah, you know, I think, again, I don't want to name names, really, but there's no shortage of stories. I'll give you like a hypothetical, right? Let's say like Mariah Carey, for example, has been on Def Jam for a long time, and Mariah Carey has had a certain amount of success, and Mariah Carey is used to spending, you know, $800,000 on any music video she makes, and all of a sudden times are different at Def Jam, and it doesn't make sense to give Mariah Carey $800,000. You've got to give Mariah Carey $500,000 now, or even $250,000, and Mariah Carey calls up, you know, L.A. Reid and says, oh, L.A., you know, I'm here with this famous director and he really wants to do my next video. Can't we just have $1 million to do this video? And like, that's a tough call for L.A. Reid to get. because you want to keep your superstars happy, but also you need to make money. You need to run your business like a smart business. So this is a long way of saying that I think there's certain artists that haven't yet fully faced the reality of how much money their career is generating for, like, in this very specific case, like Jennifer Lopez was probably not making Sony money.
She had put out 2 singles from this album, neither one of them had connected.
Right.
So common, good logic would be the...
well, and her last couple of albums didn't do anything.
Right.
I mean, J-Lo hasn't really connected on any artistic project, whether it's her movies or her
in a while.
music, in a while. So, but I don't know if that's necessarily toned down her self-esteem. I don't know that so I mean, I don't want to make assumptions because I haven't talked to the individual people here. Maybe, someone from Sony was just really rude to her and she felt she had to go to stand up for her, integrity. I really don't know, but I do know that broadly across the industry. I mean, look at what happened, like Madonna spent her whole career at Warner Brothers in the family of Warner Brothers, and when it came time to re-up her contract, they let her walk. They let her walk to Live Nation, who paid her, frankly, probably way more money than made sense.
Well, all those Live Nation deals seem, maybe not Jay-Z, but...
Maybe not Jay-Z, maybe not U2.
Nickelback, I mean, they won't see a dime on that deal for 4 years.
Well, listen, if you won't see a dime on a deal for 4 years, but you sign a 10-year deal, that might not be a bad thing.
Right.
But just like in any business, if you're signing a 10-year contract, there's a lot that can go on. Nickelback could break up, they could decide whatever it is, but I think when you see all the acts that are leaving majors, there's different reasons for all of it. A band like Pearl Jam jumps off Sony, and they jump off Sony because they have a really well-managed fan base. They own their data. So they have the 10 Club is that's the pinnacle of running your fan base. Done a fantastic job, and they knew they didn't need a label. So but then there's other acts that that I think that they just have maybe they don't fully understand the economics the way that they need to.
One of your best bet predictions in the magazine was the Rolling Stones were going to record an album this year and release it exclusively through Walmart.
Yeah, I have no idea if that's going to happen.
But it's said in Billboard.
I think I think that we've heard from pretty good sources that may well be true. I think that the real takeaway from that, though, is that if you're a big artist and you aren't under contract to a major, you can pretty much define your terms.
Right.
Because Walmart would love to have a couple million people going into their stores looking for the Rolling Stones, and Walmart would love to be able to kind of get some of the cool cachet of the Rolling Stones amongst a certain set of people onto their stores, and they'll ultimately make the Rolling Stones a lot more money than the Rolling Stones would make if they just released an album. Because Walmart, I mean, by the way, these deals, I mean, they're like one-way deals. Irving did that deal with the Eagles, with AC/DC. He did that deal with
REO, I think, too.
Well, probably most famously, I mean, in terms of one of Irving's best business moves, he put that Guns N' Roses record at, I think it was Best Buy.
Yes. And
people are like, oh, the record didn't sell. This was a dumb move. It's like, let me tell you something about that move. That was the smartest fucking move that happened in the music business in the last 5 years. And I'll tell you why. Axl Rose is a head case, was not in any condition to tour, made no indication that he really wanted to tour. His live shows, I mean, he popped up in New York during Fashion Week a couple times and were roundly decried as an embarrassment to anyone that, liked the band when Slash was in it. I mean, it was terrible. The guy wasn't going to tour. He refused to do any press. He refused to promote the record. He basically handed in this record, which was not a great record, by the way. After 14 years, he hands in kind of like a record and won't do anything to promote it. So what does Irving Azoff do? He says, hey, Best Buy, give me X millions of dollars up front on a one-way deal, and you get to distribute the Guns N' Roses record that everyone's going to be talking about. I mean, that's genius. There's no risk. And there's no way that, by the way, the fact that record didn't sell is only proof that Irving was smart.
Cut his losses.
He got the cash up front for his act.
Everybody know what you mean by a one-way deal?
One-way deal, a lot of times you cut a deal with a retail, and you're going to sell them a bunch of records, and if you don't sell, they'll send the records back, and you get a reimbursement. This was a one-way deal. Best Buy paid upfront cash for no returns. They paid upfront cash, I think $2 million, or I think they bought, I forget, it was out there in the press. I mean, I think they bought maybe 1.5 million records, at standard MSRP, manufactured suggested retail, you know, 1.5 records at $10, you know, you can do the math on that. That's a ton more money than he would have made if he'd just gone out there and sold that record. So that's, I mean, you know, you talk about like the Rolling Stones going to, you know, going to Walmart. I mean, you know, Paul McCartney spent his whole, but this is the risk of that. Paul McCartney spent his whole career, right, at EMI. His first record he releases through Concord Starbucks, right? He decides Starbucks is going to be his record label, and of course, what happens? He puts the record out, and then Starbucks, which is not a music company, decides that they don't want to be in the music business anymore. Right. So, you know, I'm very wary of these companies that aren't music companies that want to suddenly become music companies.
Going to your future shock, just a couple of the predictions. So, American Idol, thoughts?
I love Ellen. No, I don't know. I think, what are my thoughts on American Idol? You know, I think it can fall for years and years and still be the top rated show on TV. Right. I don't know that people understand how, I mean, you know, when it comes to American television watching, there's the Academy Awards, there's the Super Bowl, there's the Academy Awards, there's American Idol, and then there's everything else. Like, you look at the ratings, it's like unbelievable how many people watch American Idol. So, you know, I think probably my thoughts on American Idol are that it's an incredibly powerful show, that it'll remain a powerful show even if Simon leaves, although it'll take a hit, that the music business isn't doing enough to take advantage of this show at all. You know, everything the music business does, it's like a ripple effect, right? Like, I'm going to get my song onto American Idol and the kids are going to sing it, and then I'm going to see like a little bounce over here in digital track sales. Right. Like, that's not the game. Like, you know, why don't you have like people able to text to buy in real time? Why don't you insist, hey, American Idol, if you want to use this classic song, and we know that you do, the whole time this song is playing, I want a text to buy logo on the bottom of the screen. Like, why doesn't that happen?
Good question.
Yeah. I'll get you next.
Am I behind me?
Yeah. It's cool though, you're safe.
Yes, go ahead.
My daughter's 9 and was watching Glee with her.
Yeah.
And it was watching Glee on the day that they had the cast watching the show and texting.
Yep.
They were saying, watch me, I fall here, I almost fall here. I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
I was watching, it was so engaging to get that kind of, you're the insider now, because they're telling you what they, you know what I mean? And that whole experience was just like, to me, it seems so obvious, but yet we don't do it on a regular basis.
Yep.
I remember when e-commerce first came out, and people were saying, well, you just click on that sweater. You like the way that sweater looks, and that guy, you click on that sweater, and they'll tell you where to buy that sweater. Yeah. You know, touch screen or whatever. It may come to that at some point.
You know, you just want to integrate your buying opportunities. You want, like, if people like a song, if you're going to be in a situation where someone might like a song, you want to make sure they have the ability to buy that song. And in today's like real-time culture, when you're walking around with a music buying instrument all the time, like, you should be doing a better job of enabling that if you're the music business.
Yeah, we've got two actually. But first, like, it's going to be two-part. What do you think about Glee actually?
I think it's overrated. That's just my personal feeling.
And my thing is, as a company, are you taking stock in like digital handhelds, notebooks at all? Like, are you
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Billboard on your iPad or got a very convenient for it?
I'm thinking about Billboard on chat roulette. I think that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. I think, how many people here have used chat roulette? How many people here are lying about using chat roulette?
It crashed the other day, I heard.
It's pretty fucking weird, man. I'm not going to lie to you. So here's the thing about that. There's two things. In answer to the first question about what do I think of Glee, I'm always fascinated by phenomenon. They happen for a reason, and they're always worth studying. If everyone's suddenly talking about something, like, and you're interested in business, it is worth your time to figure out what it is that's making everyone talk about that thing, because that's genius. So, I mean, that said, I don't particularly enjoy the show, and I find some of their cover versions to be excruciating to hear. But that's kind of how I feel about it, you know. I don't disregard anyone else for digging it. You know, I have a lot of friends that, like, the same kind of friends that were into, like Gossip Girl are now into Glee.
Right.
You know, and it's just like there's like a certain type of person that loves like kind of pop TV, and that's cool. In terms of handheld devices, I'm all about handheld devices. When I've been, again, like when I was at Nielsen, I was working for a big corporate parent that would not invest in us. And one of the first orders of business under this new company is getting to the right place on handheld devices. Now, that said, I'm much more interested in the iPhone and the BlackBerry than I am in the Kindle, because until recently, the Kindle wanted 70% of revenue on their publishers, which to me, and at that ASME talk that I mentioned earlier, I was just like, you're out of your mind if you do that. That's like, I mean, again, you know, it's like if iTunes wanted 70% of all revenue, I think that would be a bad deal for the music business, to say it nicely. If Kindle wants 70% of my revenue to sell Billboard to people, I no. So, you know, but can I create an app for, you know, maybe for free that gives you the stuff we give away for free online and then upsells you to subscribe to Billboard or to see deeper versions of the charts or to, you know, X, Y, and Z? Like, yeah, 100%. I think that's gonna be a great business for us. You know, I go to music industry events all the time, and all you see are people on their BlackBerries and their iPhones. The fact that we aren't there pains me. It pains me today, it'll pain me when I wake up tomorrow, and it'll pain me until it's done.
Where do you see, from your vantage point, the issue with terrestrial radio having to pay royalties? I guess we're the only country
Yeah.
that doesn't compensate.
We're not the only country. North Korea also doesn't do it.
Okay.
That's true. North Korea and Iran. North Korea and Iran and the United States together again.
Yes.
You know, we're in great company on that front. I kind of think that what I just said right there is why ultimately radio is going to have to pay an artist fee. I really do, because it's going to come down. Radio's not going to give it up,
No.
and it's going to come down to Congress. And Congress is going to. It's going to be a pretty convincing argument when, you know, when the label lobbyist, when the RAA or whatever stands up and says, North Korea, Iran, and America. I think there's going to be a lot of politicians who don't want to like stomach that. That's my feeling. I think when something gets decided in Congress, it's an emotional thing. It's a political thing. It's not a factual thing. And I think if you get that chance to get it in front of Congress, I think they're gonna go that way.
So all the saber rattling is just that. It's the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, there's always listen, man, I mean, radio is a $20 billion+ advertising business, or it was. Maybe it's down to like 18 or 17, but it's a big business with big pockets for lobbyists. And, you know, I mean, there's gonna be saber rattling. Anytime you're talking about something that might, you know, cost an industry $1 billion or whatever it might wind up being.
And yet these radio owners are complaining that, like, if they do that, they're going to have to
go out of business
or go talk.
Yeah, you know, I just don't believe it.
Right.
I guess as simply and concise as I can say it, I think that the performance will probably happen. And
next year?
Maybe. Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked. Hi, I'm Bill Werde, and today we have a special guest, Diane Birch. Diane, you just released an album, Bible Belt.
Yes.
For those people at Fuse who are not super familiar with it yet, tell people what to expect.
I think it's kind of, a lot of people say it has a 70s kind of sound.
Yeah.
There's a lot
It's a
of
beautiful
keys.
record. It is very 70s.
Thank you. I'm into like really classic style songwriting.
You play
So-
piano on most of it, right?
Everything, yeah. I played piano, vintage like Rhodes, Wurlitzers.
Cool.
I even played guitar on one track.
A lot more people are discovering you right now because you have a somewhat coveted opening slot. Tell me a little bit about that.
Are you referring to a certain Joe Bro?
A little Joe Bro. You've got a little Joe Bro going on. How was it to open for Nick Jonas?
It's actually been amazing. Like, I was kind of freaked out in the beginning because I'm like, this is like, you know, kind of bizarre. Like, are these people just gonna be like, what is this music? But no, the fans like really seem to embrace me, and they're so sweet and like really obsessed with Nick Jonas.
Now, people are going to get to know you a little bit more in your own right. I understand you were just added to the Bonnaroo lineup.
Yeah.
That's a pretty
awesome.
huge opportunity.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Is there anything in particular you're excited about? I mean,
Pretty good
playing
time.
Bonnaroo? Anything you're looking forward to there?
Yeah, I mean, just to be on that kind of scale of a thing. I mean, the Nick Jonas tour, in all honesty, for me was like one of the biggest things I've done because it's like
Sure.
playing in front of, you know, like a 5,000 person crowd or whatever, and that's something that's still really new to me. So, I mean, just to be involved in something like that, that's on such a even much more massive scale, and obviously to share the bill with such musical legends.
Thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks.
I love the gloves. Can I get a pair of those for like editing?
Yeah, Totally. We'll put some extra sparklies on there.
That's all for today. Please be sure to check in at Billboard.com and Fuse.tv for all sorts of upcoming artists like this lady. No, you never get anything anyone promises you. You know, I was watching that. I was thinking the great thing about the thing that I do love about having built up a little bit of a platform is that I can take an artist like Diane Birch and expose her to a lot of people just because I think she's really good. You know, and that's like pretty cool. You know, I put like a year and a half ago, I put Ingrid Michaelson on the cover of our magazine, like, because I thought she was doing something really interesting that said something about the business, and I thought she was a really good songwriter. You know, being able to do that and like really move the needle a little bit for bands that deserve it, that's like pretty cool. That's pretty gratifying. Oh yeah, I mean, just, you know, we use free in a lot of ways to, you know, to keep traffic on our site. So for example, we did a deal with Lala so you can stream our charts, and you get to, you know, you do that for free. It's a great music discovery tool, and you know, we monetize it through advertising and share a cut of that with Lala. You know, freemium is definitely a model. The problem with free is that there's a lot of pressure to monetize. Like right now, one of the biggest things that's wrong in the music business is the record labels and publishers want to charge services like Spotify, like Mog. They want to charge these services X amount of money per stream, per usage, X% of revenue, and it's basically making it impossible for these services to really have a successful business. But, you know, before you know, cry a tear for these services, it's like, you know, the record companies know that these services only exist because of the music. So you got to find the right balance there so that there can be a business model. But I guess my point is that it's very tough to make a lot of revenue with free. Yep.
How important do you think it is to release like the right single for an album to take off itself? Because I've seen, for example, like a lot of artists now releasing like 2 singles. They're releasing like a single to pop.
Yeah, it depends on the artist, honestly, and how, you know, you have to think about it. If you're interested in selling an album, and not everyone is anymore, but if you're interested in selling an album, you have to think about the campaign from like soup to nuts, and really what am I trying to put out there, and who's gonna want to buy this record, and how am I gonna reach those people? That's really what it comes down to. So like you look at an album like last year's big Grammy winner was Plant and Krause. Plant and Krause, yeah, Plant and Krause was last year, which I thought was a beautiful album. I just thought it was a great album. And they didn't, I mean, there was no single on that album, and it went up selling, I think, 1.5, close to 2 million copies.
Right.
But that's Plant and Krause. If Britney Spears put out an album and didn't have a single, she'd sell 10 copies. Well, no, that's not true. I mean, she's got a big fan base, no matter what she does, and you know, she would probably sell, I think if Britney put out a record, didn't release anything, she would sell 350,000 copies of it. And the difference between 350,000 copies and 2.5 million or wherever she is on this current album is singles. Because she's a radio artist and she needs those singles to drive. If you're a radio artist and you're looking for 1 million, 2 million sold, yeah, you're gonna live and die on the single. But if you're, you know, if you're like an underground hip hop act, or you're like an indie rock band, or you're whatever you are, and you know, you're kind of coming at it from a different point, you're not so top heavy, you don't have all these expenses sunk into, you know, Britney spent, I don't know, probably $2 million just recording the tracks on her album. So you've got to get that back. You work with a top producer, like all these producer-driven songs, you're going to pay a top producer $100,000 to do a track. As much as $100,000, depending on the track, depending on the budget for the project, depending on how badly the producer wants to work with that artist. You know, next time around, Lady Gaga won't have to spend $100,000 on a track because people are going to want to work with Lady Gaga. But yeah, if you're one of the top producers. So anyway, my point is just, it kind of just depends on the whole economics of the thing. One of my favorite new albums lately came from like a folk pop singer named Alison Weiss. And you haven't heard of it, I guarantee you. I mean, she financed her album through one of these services online that lets you, you know, have fans prepay for the album. She recorded it for probably like a couple $1,000s, and she just has a really good gift for writing, you know, pop songs. I happened to catch her because a friend dragged me to, you know, one of her sets at, you know, some club downtown, and I thought she was great. And I took one of her albums then, and I thought it was great. And so when it came time for her to sell her new album, because she you know, created a new album, you know, I donated like $20 to the cause, and lots of people did, and so she had enough money to record her album, and then she sold the album. And you know, I mean, it's like, again, it's all about what your expectations are. I mean, her expectations were to make enough money selling her album to keep her out on the road, and she did that. Her expectations were not to sell 1.5 million copies.
So I want to thank Bill for coming here tonight.